Hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to this conversation. My name is Charles Tissou and along with Pierre-Alexandre Matteo, we are the creators of Art Basel Paris Conversation. Today we are thrilled to welcome a sterling panel of artists and creators, poets, DJ, in order to discuss the past, present and future of urban avant-garde. The panel will be moderated by Ulrich, a Serpentine Gallery's artistic director. I will leave him the privilege to introducing the other panelists. We'd like also to thank Agnès B. and Darman Fund for supporting this panel. You have been ended one of the projects she did with FUTURA 2000. Last but not least, the conversation will be in English, and we would be really thankful if you could switch off your phone. Unfortunately, there won't be any question at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles and Pierre-Alexandre. I want to extend thanks to Noah, to Clément, to Colin, to Jess, to the Petit Palais team, of course. And we also want to say a special thank you to Agnès B, to Elodie and William for the collaboration on this panel. And before beginning, I just thought it would be very nice that you all give a very warm welcome to our three amazing artists, to Jane Dickson, James Massiah, and FUTURA. Do you have a mic? So we have all mics. And of course, thank you all so much for being here with us on such a busy day. Now, when Pierre-Alexandre and Charles proposed the theme of the urban avant-garde, I thought it was very exciting. And it's, of course, a dream come true that with Lenny and Jane, we can have two of the great pioneers of the urban avant-garde, really since the late 70s. Their pioneering work, as we will hear today, has really found art history. And then we can have with James one of the most exciting voices of a new urban avant-garde. James and I have been collaborating a lot with poetry and music in London at the Serpentine. I thought it would be interesting to kind of begin with this notion of the urban avant-garde. I mean, I was born in Zurich, and Zurich, of course, is the city of Dada, and of course, Dada in that sense is super connected to the theme we are discussing at the moment. The Centre Pompidou has the big show on surrealism. We are in Paris, where there is, of course, also situationism as a truly important urban avant-garde. And I want to kind of begin as a first question, because often the future is invented with fragments from the past, to ask the three of you, in terms of art, music, poetry, what are the kind of historic urban avant-gardes which inspired you? What are sort of positions from the past who inspired you when you began? And maybe we can begin with Lenny.
Perhaps we can begin with Jane, actually. Ladies first.
I was inspired by Baudelaire and the idea of being recording my own time and my own place, and being a flaneur in New York as much as a woman can be a flaneur, which is a different experience than men doing it. And I was influenced by the Situationists. I had a dear friend from Paris who I used to do prints with early on when I came to New York. And that was an inspiration. And also collaborative projects, which I was part of. There were a bunch of European artists and Australian artists that were very socially engaged. So there was a lot of that in our various projects.
Thank you. And Lenny?
Thank you, Hans. Yeah, I mean, it sounds anti-Art Basel in this event, but as a teenager, as a 15-year-old kid growing up in New York City, this would have been 1970, I looked to the writing on the wall, if you will, as a form of creative expression, self-identification, and a kind of coming from a very, let's say, my my social situation wasn't that great, and opportunity, resources were lacking. But graffiti, if you will, was something that spoke to me. And somehow, I came up with the identity of FUTURA 2000, which, to be quite honest, and as a 15-year-old kid, in that year, 1970, I was certainly sure I would never live to see that number. It's quite ironic that we're here in 2025, let's be honest, and wow, that's quite a departure from my taking off point. But here I am. My inspirations were nothing to do with, quote unquote, the art world or art history, because I was honestly very ignorant of it. Yes, I knew Warhol, I knew Picasso, I knew Michelangelo. I knew the classics, but I couldn't have told the difference between Dadaism, Surrealism, Futurism. So sadly, I arrived with not much education. Today, I'd like to think that quite organically, I just created my own movement within a movement. And, I'm quite proud, actually, that I traveled this timeline and just had an opening at the Bronx Museum, so I kind of feel like I finally arrived. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, with poetry and stuff, I liked to listen to pirate radio when I was younger, and it was always really cool when the MC would shout out people who'd sent messages in. And so I think for myself, as far as my lineage or ancestry with writing and the work that I do, even you mentioned the writing on the wall. So I grew up in the church, and I know that that's a reference to the hand of God writing on the wall. And there's always this thing of wanting to make sure that your people knew that you knew they existed. So I kind of do what I do with a view to recording my existence and the existence of my peers and my friends as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And recently, I spoke to Kid Cudi, and we spoke about you. And it seems that Kid Cudi was also somehow important for you. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, Kid Cudi is massive for me. It's cool that he's into it. But I think for me, it was when I was at university, I got into Kid Cudi. It was sort of like a sad boy music. And at the time, again, having come out of church, I think I was a bit lost and trying to find some sort of direction, philosophically as much as creatively. And Kid Cudi's wails and moans and hums helped me feel a bit more at home.
Thank you. Now, the city is undoubtedly a very multifaceted terrain, which is constantly shifting and evolving, which is why Oskar Kokoschka, the expressionist painter, once said it's kind of impossible to make a portrait of a city because the moment you paint a city, it's already changed, And he said that once in an interview. And part of this conversation today considers the history of forms that, from sort of clubs to city walls, have transformed the metropolis into a theater, one could maybe say, of poetic actions. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit, as you've worked all so strongly with the city, as a theme in your work, but also as a locus of interventions where you actually intervene. If you could tell us a little bit about your views, how the city can be a theater of poetic action, and how the city can be a space where an alternative production of reality is possible. And maybe we can start with Jane again.
Okay. Cities are man-made. So we're making the cities so we can reconfigure them and remake them. And I feel like this is where culture is, the tectonic plates are crashing into each other, and that's where I choose to live, to experience those conflicts and intersections and reflect them with my paintings. I feel like painting is a way to. I go around like everybody else, and I'm like, oh, this is terrible. This is driving me crazy, and then I want to analyze it by photographing and then making paintings of whatever seemed to be the sort of inflection points, because the cities are what somehow we think we needed and what we've chosen to accept, and hopefully by thinking harder about it, we can shift some of it. But also, I really plan to just document my day-to-day life, and then, like you said, as soon as I finish painting it, then it changes, and people are like, oh, it's so nostalgic that you're looking. But I'm like, that's, you know, that's what make cars people were driving in the year that I made those paintings. Those are the clothes people were wearing. So it's gone from my focusing on what's outside right now to suddenly there's this whole historical aspect to it that is growing.
And talking about interventions in the city, you've of course also curated intervention of the city, the legendary Times Square electronic billboards, where you basically so early on brought artists to the street. Can you tell us about that? And by the way, I wanted to ask if you can have the images rotate in the background, because we have images from the speakers and we wanted them to be in a loop. So if you could start that now, I think it would be nice for everyone to see a few examples of the work. Yeah, Times Square.
I was involved as a young artist with this group Collaborative Projects. I also was involved with group material, and we did various interventions. There was just an image from City Maze, which I did in the South Bronx in 1980. So I was doing these more art installation interventions and street postering. I went around with Christy Rupp sticking up her rats all the way around, and heading into and out of garbage piles in New York. But to the sign, I got a job as a digital designer on the first computer light board in Times Square. I got that job. It was at one Times Square where they dropped the ball on New Year's Eve. And that was in 1978, and that was before there were any home computers. There weren't even really any digitized alphabets. There was just that Unicode type, and there were no user-friendly programs yet. So I was the designer there, and I did that for several years, and I thought, computers, this is an amazing technology, but it doesn't satisfy my interest in art making. I want something I can get my hands dirty with and I can smell, and the computer was too linear and cerebral for me. But I thought, before I leave this job, I want to let my friends use this fantastic machine. I've always tried to follow the idea of that art making is stone soup, and that everybody has something. Everybody just thinks, oh, well, what I have is nothing. I want what you have. But really, if everybody puts something in, then you can do incredible things. So in that case, what I could put in was access to this sign. And I convinced the Public Art Fund to let me, and my boss to let me organize this. And I said, but I only want to do it if I get to pick the artists, because I know all these new young artists that nobody else knows about yet. I mean, nobody in the profession knows about yet. So one of the artists was Keith Haring. It was his first public project. And Jenny Holzer, it was her introduction to digital signs, and David Hammonds and Crash. I picked a star-studded group. And then I quit that job, but the Public Art Fund continued that project for another 8 or 9 years, so 12 artists a year. It was many wonderful artists got to do incredible projects, and then Creative Time took it over on a different billboard. So there now has been digital art in Times Square since 1983, so 41 years. They gave me an award last year for it.
Bravo. And Jane, thank you so much. And Lenny, I want to hear from you about your views on how the city can be a theater of poetic action, a space where an alternative reality production, in a way, is possible. Because that's so much, at the core of what you've done for so many decades.
Yeah, I mean, 40 years ago, public art was, in its infancy, as Jane is describing, with the Times Square public, display. But And it's funny what James was talking about, the writing on the wall and his reference to church. And as I recall, the public streets were inundated with religious graffiti, right? In the 60s, when I was growing up, before I arrived as a graffiti writer, I took the subway to school. My family didn't have a car. So I'm just like kind of walking around the city, and all I saw was read the Bible, go to church, become Catholic, pray. So these religious messages were just really heavy duty. And let's go to 1982-ish, when Jean-Michel arrived, sort of doing poetry, which, I consider Jean's early street work to be extremely poetic, intellectual. But at the same time, if you think about what Jean was doing, he was speaking to a specific crowd. Like, he didn't do that in the South Bronx. He didn't do that in Brooklyn. He did it in Soho. So it was clever. I observed that, wow, that's very clever, because he understands what he's doing. Unlike me, he knew who Twombly was. He knew who Penck was. He knew who he was referencing. He knew who the kind of forefathers were in that world. When I first arrived and did my first abstract painting, people compared me to Kandinsky. And today if you say that, I'll be like, wow, thank you very much, that's great. At the time, I took it as an insult, because it's like, well, what the, excuse me, that's just me. Like, hey, come on, like, it's not fair for, and this happens to every young artist, that you will, because there's no other alternative, be compared to another artist. And they will draw up comparisons and similarities. And that's the art world's way, it's always been, to kind of sell you, sell your field, put you in a box. And so initially, I had to turn to Kylie Jenkins. So by the way, Jane and I showed a Fun Together gallery in the early 80s.
The only woman that ever showed a Fun gallery.
Yes, you were. But, so, Jane is like my contemporary, no doubt, but I've always seen her as like, because she's older than me, and I always respect people.
Only a little bit older.
Only a little bit. But just to say that as an older person in my life, I have enormous respect for you, just on the strength of that, and plus she was enormously smart and talented. But all those years at Fun, back to Jean-Michel, if you will, and today, just to say, yeah, I thought people comparing me to Kandinsky was not fair, because I'd never seen the man's work, or had I seen it, I didn't know that it was his. But at the time, I said to some person who made the comparison analogy, hey, that's great, but one day somebody will be comparing another artist to me. So in a way, I was pretty cocky, but I also did have confidence, which I think from any kid from the hood, the community, the outer boroughs, when you're an outsider, you certainly need some confidence. But today I see public art as a very much accepted form of global culture. Look at Martha Cooper. There's a photograph of my painting from 1980, which is kind of like my opus as a graffiti writer, painting illegally in the New York subway system. But we were only looking and reveling and marveling in that image because Martha Cooper took a photograph of it. So there's something to be said about the documentation that occurred in our era that enabled that work to live, into immortality, basically. And I'm a recipient of the good fortune of her presence and what her skill set. But I'm using her as an example because she's probably not here, because she's somewhere around the world documenting street art in Republic of Congo, Vienna, pick your city, there's a street art festival next week. So the modern day version I have of cities and the street is that they're in a kind of a dance now, where young people don't have to necessarily be illegal, but can arrive to perhaps a future of, frescoes and murals predate us, but this kind of outdoor work that can be appreciated by the public. Because I think after everything is said and done, love my show, love exhibitions, love Art Basel, love it all, but kind of prefer street art and the work that appears in the public spaces, because this is an indication of where we're going and who the future of, quote unquote, that genre of communication is coming from.
That's very important, and of course, it makes me think of Dewey, the philosopher who inspired the whole Roosevelt plan with all these murals, in the 30s, when he emphasized, how important it is to bring art into society. I wanted to ask you, Lenny, to give us one example of such a poetic action. And I thought, because very often when I ask artists about street art, your seminal piece from 1980, Break, is mentioned as a real game changer. You painted the full exterior of a New York City subway car with vibrant colors. And it was really a game-changing piece. Can you tell us about this moment? What happened there?
Believe it or not, fortunately, I was brought to the space in which I painted that, and it's an illegal piece, as we see. That's the train, and that's the photograph I mentioned by Martha, which, by the way, this train is alive, living, moving through the jungle, and captured in the Bronx. So that was also a kind of great 360 for me to start with Break, photograph in the Bronx Museum. But no, that train took me about, I would say, no more than 4 hours to paint. So considering you're up against law enforcement, security personnel, employee, whoever, rival others, who may want to occupy that space you're in. I think it's a miracle that I did that. I also did it unconsciously. My only thought was I need to fill this entire wagon, this dimension, because for me, if you see it and you think about it, it's not a subway car, it's a painting. It's a big fucking painting. And that's what I was trying to show, that I could not be pigeonholed into just being a graph writer who does letters and drop shadows and has style, but I have an imagination, and I wish to express myself in this way. So, as I said, that was the last illegal piece I ever did. People still reference me as a graffiti writer. Okay, I get it, but I'm not. I'm an individual. I'm an artist. I'm more than an artist. I'm a creative force. Okay, I just have this thing inside of me that I just want to communicate, and I use spray cans and other traditional artist mediums to do it. But yeah, Break was a miracle. Once again, it's like I'm sleepwalking through a lot of all that moment, because I got Fat Five Freddy, Lee Quinones, Don D. White, Zephyr, Scene, Phase 2. I have so many mentors surrounding me, and I'm simply wanting to be part of them, but I want to constantly emphasize my individuality. So I think Break does that pretty effectively.
Thank you so much. And that miracle brings us to James also, because of course you do similar miracles, in cities, as does Jane. I love this idea of miracles. Douglas Gordon once said, we still believe in miracles. And I want to hear from you about how the city can be a theater of poetic action, where alternative production of reality is possible. Also in relation, of course, to the city and poetry and the city of music, which is what you work on.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying hearing you guys speak. For myself, I think that it really does come down, I'm a party boy. I enjoy, anyone who knows London knows Kingston Road. And I think that any of the poetry that I really do is just texting friends being all right, yeah, where's the house party? Or trying to contact narcotics dealers and then trying to figure out where to meet them and stuff like that. And I think I really enjoy the city for that reason as well. I love people, I enjoy interacting with people. And the cities tend to be where the people are. And I guess in that sense, a lot of my writing as well will depict those nights, those evenings where the people are congregating. And I try, maybe as part of my practice, to get people together as frequently as possible for parties and poetry nights and everything else.
Thank you. Now, since 2002, you know, I do always our Basel conversation, so it's 22 years, and we have a ritual when we do this conversation. We always have breakfast with the speakers, and that happened this morning, and we had a wonderful breakfast, and Jane had this great idea, because I was actually looking last night at this lecture, Jane, you gave, and in that lecture, you know, there is a lecture, but then all of a sudden there's a change of gear, and one has a moment of, you know, where one goes into cinema. And you had this great idea that we should have the same today in the panel, and that we could all of a sudden sort of go from a panel discussion into a poetry reading. So when you suggested that, James very kindly agreed to do that. So we now welcome James Massiah to do a poetry reading.
Yeah. Yeah, this poem is called The Funk, and it really just does talk about what I was talking about, being in a city, move around really quickly from person to person, people to people. So, slap, bang, crunch, late lunch, ride home, school's out, mum's in, get fat, get thin, fast food, slow day, snail pace, no way, got fast, sped up, the funk got down, we rush so much, we clutch not much, in transit, don't chat shit, there's no time, no space, no car, no need. Get back, let's ride, let's run, have fun. Put that gun down, don't end up in jail, on bail. Be free, be niche, be chic, wag tail, shake bum. Milkshake from that place tastes like milk from a holy cow. My God, my gosh, the time it flies. So fly, be fly. Get high without the drugs or drop cocaine. Be bold, get fresh. Have sex, have test, be wild, don't fold, don't be controlled by peers or fears or debts or arrears. Go forth, go rear, go where the hell you wanna go. It's your time, your soul, your smile, your face, your phone call. I gave my all to youth, but time has moved, the years accrued. I left my crew, I'm on my own and so are you, my dear friends. It's now time to face the truth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, this was in a way already kind of a moment of collaboration this morning, not during the breakfast, when Jane suggested that. And that brings us to the next topic I wanted to kind of touch upon, which is the topic of collaboration, because in your three practices, collaboration plays a very important role. And Jane, you have often acted as a link between the street scene and the art world, but you've also been part of collectives, of collaborative collectives. Can you talk about the importance of collaboration in your practice? Because you said in an interview recently that it's really also about this idea of togetherness, that art for you is about bringing things together, bringing people together.
Well, I will say that I like to think of art as a dialogue as opposed to a string of monologues, which I think somehow the art school model can lead people to, so that each person has a spiel they say about their work every time they get a chance, and then the next person talks about their work, and there's no conversation. So I was drawn to well, basically, I think at first I was just drawn to anyone who would, you know, a place I could get in and have my 2 cents. But also I had a lot of energy, so in places like Fashion Moda, which was an art space that was a spin-off from Collaborative Projects. Stephanine started it in the late 70s, and I was in a couple of group shows that other people curated, and then I did this city maze where I made a labyrinth out of cardboard and made a movie out of it. And then I was like, oh, this movie needs to have, well, first I thought, this is in the South Bronx. I want to work with graffiti artists that live in that neighborhood. So I invited Crash and Knock to paint it with me. And then when I made the film, I asked Fab Five Freddy to do the rap, and I wrote the rap. So it has, when we were young, you're just like, oh, I'll do everything, and brought in different people. And it turned out that the guy who shot my film is now a big Hollywood cinematographer. He was married a friend of mine for a green card. That's how I met him. So everybody was helping everybody. He needed, to have something to show on his way to Hollywood. So I just have always sort of, maybe it partly comes from coming from a large family, feeling like, oh yes, I've got to include people, but also I get energy from them. And really that's how that graffiti art success show that you did was because I had invited Crash, and then Fashion Moda said, oh, do you want to do the next show, a solo show? And Crash said, I'm 16. I don't even know what a solo show is, but I could bring my boys. And then, so he did Graffiti Art Success and launched FUTURA and many other people. So I get energy from other people sharing energy. It explodes.
Thank you so much. And Lenny, collaboration is also key for you. You told us this morning that you came first to Paris through a collaboration with The Clash. So we obviously want to hear about that, because that's an amazing story. But you collaborated not only with a lot of individuals and a lot of different artists, but what is I think also interesting is that you very early on collaborated also with brands in Japan and then also elsewhere, at a moment when that wasn't a current practice. Today we have so many artists who work with, we see it this week, who work with different brands, with fashion brands. You pioneered that space as well. So it would be great to hear about these two things. How did you come to Paris with The Clash, and then some other collaborations, and then about how these whole brand collaborations began. 2 questions in one.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, come on, let's go back to 1981. Summer of 81, I'm going to turn 26 that year. So I'm a 25-year-old, never been to Europe, met The Clash in 1981 in New York City. Myself and Zephyr, who I've mentioned tonight, we painted a large banner for them, and it's featured in the end of the Radio Clash video. But it's the Sandinista double album tour, and whilst they were there, they were recording Radio Clash, the first single, and I did the artwork for that, and subsequent to that whole experience with the boys, they invited me to come to UK. So James, I arrive in UK in Westbourne Park, Ladbroke Grove, Westbourne Park, correct? Is that?
But yeah, where Carnival is. I'm from South, but I've got friends in West.
I got you. But so here I am. I'm a 25-year-old kid in Europe for the first time, which was so awesome for me. But the arrival to Paris was imminent because we were based in UK, obviously, but we're going to Paris for touring. We played here at the Moderator Theater, I believe, at that time. But I was spray painting for the boys on stage. It was really amazing moment for me, discovering this city for the first time. And I think within 2 years, I had an exhibition with a gallery here called Yvon Lambert in Les Halles, like Rue aux Ours or something like that, by the Quartier de la Loge complex. That's my Parisian history, guys. I know my shit. But just to say, Pompidou Center around the corner, it was kind of breathtaking for me as a young graffiti artist. Yeah, even in '85, I was claiming it. But it was just like I was trying to pursue my career now in what was a gallery system. And we were aided from that experience by the Europeans, quite frankly. They were the ones who embraced what we were doing. we weren't anything actually in America after Fashion Moda and the Fun Gallery had their moment. It was really the Europeans that picked up the torch for our group, and the Dutch, the Germans, the French, very much so. Merci, les Français, you guys were awesome. But the Spanish, the Portuguese, you know, everyone in Europe was really touching our culture and helping me kind of arrive. Collaborations with other artists was commonplace for us, right? We would paint trains together, so we understood that. Eventually, collaborations with brands, yes, they did occur because I was kind of at the forefront of the street art culture in the early 90s, and thus began this relationship with independent small brands and major brands, bigger brands. And then eventually by the year 2000, if you will, that's my first real collabo. I'm sorry, late 90s, all the Japanese brands, thank you, arigato. But in the year 2000, I branded with Levi's. So for me, that was my first moment with what I would call a big brand, a legacy brand. And yeah, it kind of spiraled from there. And yes, I'm one of the first people to do it, but I was also at the tip of this spear that was already moving around the planet, arriving in cities. I would be fascinated to come anywhere. And by the year 2000, I certainly arrived. I had my first book was published. But really my breakthrough moment, guys, occurs in, I would say, 95 when I, and Jane, you were on the tech early, but when I did embrace the internet and when I did have a computer and I wrote my own webpage in 96, and that's when I understood what the planet really was about and how you could be a satellite to all these other cities around the planet and touch people and make contacts, and birds of a feather flock together, so people would find each other. You know, like-minded people would, like, I'm in London, yo, what's the dope club, blah, blah, blah. And you go to dope club, XYZ, and there's my crew. These are my, I don't know any of you, but we all share in a kind of emotion. Could be the beats, could be, oh, my man got the superstar, you know, like whatever you're rocking. All these things were very much part of our fabric, I feel. And yeah, I mean, one thing I can say about collaborations, I've always tried to work with people and individuals who I not just respect, obviously, you know, I have some integrity, but I'd like to form a relationship with someone, you know, in your, like, now I get hit up from everyone and it got to get filtered through management and all that. But back in the day when I kind of control stuff, was never chasing the amount they were offering. It was chasing an individual within said company who I also was onto and felt, wow, this individual, he, her, them, it, whoever, was bright. We had a commonality, a mindset, and I could see that they were feeling the kind of soup, right? We're all drinking, not the Kool-Aid, but the soup, because the soup is elevated from Kool-Aid, right? You know, it's just a bit more of a, that's a nod to the French onion soup. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And this morning at the breakfast, I kind of asked you how the two of you met. And there's a kind of a story which has also to do with collaboration, with a film, I think, Jane, you were involved with the very beginning of hip hop and went on this journey.
You're talking about Japan.
And I think we need to hear this story because it's completely fascinating. It's really the beginning. Hip hop wasn't well known at the time.
Like almost everybody in New York in the 70s, we were seeing all this painting on trains and like, who is this? Where's this coming from? And then in 1980, when my friends and I did the Times Square show, Fab Five Freddy, who was, you know, very entrepreneurial and looking around, and I think probably Glenn O'Brien told him about the Times Square show. So Fab Five Freddy came to the Times Square show and met my then boyfriend, Charlie Ahern, and they decided to do the film Wild Style, which was the first hip-hop movie, the first movie about and using hip-hop, rap, breakdancing, and graffiti art. And I was one of the producers, and I designed the animated titles. And then when it was released, and actually I want to say one more thing about it. When we first pitched the movie to PBS to see if public television would pay for this movie about graffiti hip-hop culture. It was rejected by the people in Washington. They said, oh, this is just of only local interest to New Yorkers. People in Washington aren't going to be interested in it. And the minute that DC said no, ZAF and Fourth Channel London went, how much do you need? We're down. And then the Japanese jumped in. So it was global from the jump. And it was just America kept being like, we don't want to see it, we don't want to hear it, we don't want it to exist, because this is a huge wave of people who have been, up until now, unseen and unheard by the dominant culture, which was what I found incredibly exciting about it, was people like Lenny who just were like, I'm gonna put my art out where you're gonna have to see it, whether you want to or not. I'm going to change the conversation and change the culture. So we went on a tour to Japan with 20-some young, almost all men, breakdancers, rappers, and artists. And it was a rollicking 3-week tour that Lenny was on. He was a little bit older than most of them and a little bit more independent. And as I was saying to Hans Ulrich, they insisted on eating McDonald's every day in Japan. I was like, please, I want some sushi. Nope. We did Mickey D's every day, but we had a great time. And there's one picture of me with the Cold Crush getting on the bullet train in Japan that's going around here.
Of course, music and collaboration. It would be great to hear how, you bring collaboration to your practice and into your musical practice, and also not only in terms of what Jane said, but also in terms of what Lenny said about brands, because you've, of course, not only collaborated with musicians and DJs and poets in a constant way in London ever since we know each other, but you also work with brands. I remember, for example, this Barber project. No, you did. So, again, 2 questions.
Yeah, okay. So with music, I guess I produce music myself, but I'm probably, I won't say best known for, because I guess it depends which context you're referring to, but it will be that a producer or a friend of a producer will hear a poem or read a poem somewhere, like it, and they want to put it on a house track or a dub track or a hip-hop track, drill track even. That's happened now as well. And I'll be honest, I don't love the studio process. I much prefer performing live or just partying. But then there is the business of having to sit down with someone who has different skill set to you, and trying to find a way to speak their language in the studio. With the Barber thing, that was, I guess, it gets cold in the streets, you need a coat. And I think I typically wear a Barber jacket when I'm in London and it's raining. Someone must have told someone at an agency that was the case. And they were like, let's get him reading the poem in a jacket in Brixton. And your point about money, it isn't everything, but I think it definitely helps because partying is expensive. And so it's good to have money for hotels and drugs, yeah.
Collaborations, there are a lot of poets, and of course dub poetry plays a lot of role in these sessions you make. And kind of when we spoke with Pierre-Alexandre and Charles about this panel quite at the beginning, we thought it would be really great to hear you talk a little bit about oral and ephemeral and diasporic practices related to dub poetry. So it would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, so my dad's from Barbados. I'm from Jamaica. Oh, she's actually from Manchester, not Jamaica. Although there is a Manchester in Jamaica, but she's from Manchester, UK. And do you know what's funny? So there's the Clash track "Ghetto Defendant," which is a big tune and one of my favorites. And as far as the collaboration of music,
I think Allen Ginsberg is.
Ginsberg,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a Ginsberg poem. And yeah, I guess I should say as well, as far as poetic ancestors, the beats definitely are people the crew I look up to. And so yeah, it was this idea of sound system. So I mentioned Mutabaruka as a Jamaican dub poet that I was a fan of growing up, and then there was John Cooper Clarke, Manchester poet, who inspired me a lot as well. And I guess as far as like trying to carry that lineage, it's difficult because London is a changing city. It's just today I was on my phone scrolling as you do, and there are some friends that used to book parties in Shoreditch, which is an area in East London, and they're saying that no new clubs opening can have a late license, and all existing clubs have to like change their licenses. So, you know, the idea of like going to a venue, setting up a sound system and like, you know, rapping or DJing, whatever, like that's gonna change for sure. But there is a crew in London called Yo-Yo, and they've taken that kind of initial like dub sound system idea. They kind of put speakers on a van, drive around, and have like Dizzy Rascal or someone will just be there rapping in the streets. So it's kind of come back around, and it is very much like that lineage of like dub sound systems, Jamaica in the streets. Everyone can have a good time. Yeah.
That's a beautiful connection and brings us to another chapter of this conversation. I thought that we have to talk about the night. No, in terms of the city, recently, about a year ago, I had a conversation with Wolfgang Tillmans, and he talked about the fact that, so many amazing clubs have disappeared, so many aspects of nightlife have disappeared. It connects what you just told us. And of course, there's always new models, but still, there is disappearance of many things. And of course, your three practices connect to the night. Jane, for you, it's a very important part of your paintings, to paint the city in the night. And also, Lenny, of course, a lot of your work existed in the night and has been painted in the night. Can maybe begin with Jane to talk about the night?
Well, I first found my direction in painting by looking out when I was working on this computer billboard, which when they asked me what hours I wanted, I volunteered for the night shift on weekends. And I said to myself that I was asking to work in Times Square in the night shift on weekends so that I would have my days free to paint. But really, it meant that I was in Times Square when it was hot. And I would look out the window and go, oh my God, look what's going on there. Oh my God. So then I thought, why am I trying to paint still lifes or something when outside the window here, there's this whole world that needs to be documented. So I was focused on nightlife, and I feel like particularly Times Square comes alive at night when you can see all the lights. I mean, now the signs are so bright that you can see them in the day, but it used to be more that it was, that it lit up at night. And also, as a woman, I've sort of specialized in going where I don't belong. Like I was the only woman at Fun Gallery, and I could go on to a million different places where I was the only woman. But I really was like, I can be out at night, even though it's dangerous for a woman. So it was that sense of mixed excitement and danger that I have been drawn to in all my work.
And also, I recently into Richard Estes, a hyper-realist, and there is a kind of a difference, as you also once said, because the hyper-realists painted like all the details, absolutely every single thing, whilst you said that actually you could put light wherever you want and pay attention. So there's also that. Certain things are then not painted.
Yes, and people always say my work is somewhat cinematic. And while I do work from photos, I don't work slavishly from photos. I work from things that I saw, and usually I took a picture of, but I'm trying to get back to what I remember, and my photo generally doesn't capture what I remember. So I feel free to be very selective and go, oh, okay, this action is going to be under this light, and then forget about what's all in the corner there. It's just dark. Yeah, so it's a way to compose with light.
And Lenny, I imagine that much of your work within the city, particularly also much of the graffiti work, depended on the night. the moments kind of when a new energy takes over and also new possibilities emerge. So could you talk a little bit about the significance of nighttime spaces in relation to your creativity?
Yeah, well, I mean, the element that I came from lived at night. You know, I mean, we thrived at night. It's kind of like, you know, in your kitchen, you know, you come up, I don't know, 3 in the morning and there's a few roaches scurrying around. You know, they're not really there when the lights are on, and, you know, use a musical reference like neither are the freaks, right? So many things come out at night. But just to say, yeah, we needed night. We need the cover of night to kind of do our clandestine operation. But later in life, Jane's talking about working late. I had some success in the 80s, as we mentioned, Fun Gallery, New York New Wave, Tony Shafrazi, blah, blah, blah. By 1985, actually, it was kind of all falling apart for me, and I wound up getting a job at the post office. Ironically, that's kind of like what my dad had ambitions for me in a civil servant gig. So, you know, it was like, he was gone already by 87 when I'm working the night shift. I love to work graveyard shift, right? We call it graveyard shift back home. It's like midnight to midnight to 8. So from midnight to 8 in the morning, that's my 8 hours of a 24-hour day that I can totally lock down. So I had that gig, loved working at nights. Later in the early 90s, I took a job at Kinko's, which is a copy center, and that was all a scam to get resources because Kinko's had computers, they had copy machines. So I took a job as the color copy operator at Kinko's, the one on Union Square below University Place, below Union Square in New York City. It was like the dopest Kinko's in New York because I was working there, and I used to provide free color copies to all my people that would just. It's like, yo, Lenny's working at Kinko's, and I was just like, yeah, come through. I'll fucking hook you up. So I've been all about exploiting resources. Okay, that's my thing. But not for nothing, I ran the fuck out of those machines, and I learned a lot about, you know, color copying, and I had techs I could call at a moment's notice. But I also had techs from Apple Computer, and I had techs from Adobe. And I had people coming in there basically giving me tutorials. I tell the guys, yeah, I don't know what you're doing in the city, but can you come by like around 1, 3 in the morning? You know what I mean? So I have my window and get my skills on it. And that 93 experience at Kinko's, working graveyard, led me to learning about the web and when I wrote my first web page eventually. But yeah, nice is what's up. I mean, you know, there's a kind of fear element and strength in numbers. You know, you don't want to be out there solo dolo. But yeah, I mean, there's this great energy. But sadly, I could say since the 90s and this new millennium, I'm not a vampire anymore. You know, I don't like sleep during the day anymore. I wind up maybe getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night now. You know, I'm at bed around like 2-ish, but I'm up around 7, 8. So I'm good to go. But yeah, night sounds crazy, clubbing. You know, I'm a little too old for that, but yeah.
Thank you. And that brings us to James, because you once told me about a project called True Romance. And that's a 6-track London nightlife odyssey. As far as I see it, it's really a kind of a chronicle of the city. It brings us back also to the idea of, you know, the topic of the conversation. It's a chronicle also of the city, but also of the highs and lows of love. Can you talk a little bit about True Romance and about this nightlife odyssey?
Yeah, True Romance is the EP that I produced and released earlier this year. It's actually about the girlfriend that lived in West London and the demise of that relationship. The relationship's demise was basically on account of my overindulgence in the nightlife and the things that it brought. And so I guess if you're doing that, you can't really be the ideal boyfriend. And I guess to kind of seek redemption for myself more than anyone else, I kind of, well, not even redemption, but just to kind of go through the process of what happened, I decided to make this record. And I made it in 2020, so I guess clubs aren't really happening in that same way. But but I would find parties and chances to play my music to people. And I guess that was actually in the nighttime. It kind of started in the nighttime, but very quickly it would become the daytime, if you know how I party. And so, yeah, I mean, listen to the records. I think is really good, and my ex thinks it's good as well. So that should count for something. And
I'll listen to this after the panel. I promised that this would not be a marathon, so we have to somehow bring it to a conclusion now.
Yeah.
And as you know, there is only kind of one recurrent question I always ask in all the conversation, and that's about unrealized projects. And it's particularly interesting, in relation to the topic of the street against Babylon, the urban avant-garde resistance, because in a way, we know a lot about architects and urbanists, unrealized projects, because they publish them, and they are published also through competitions. But we know very little, actually, of unrealized projects of urban avant-garde resistance by artists, And unrealized projects, there can be many reasons why a project is unrealized. It can be too big to be realized. It can be too, maybe also too time intense to be realized. It can be too expensive to be realized. It can be unrealizable, simply utopic also, or a dream. There's, of course, also, particularly in relation to today's topic, also censorship, which is important. Certain projects are in the city unrealized because of censorship. And as my friend Doris Lessing, the late Doris Lessing always said, there are also the projects which don't happen because we don't dare to do them, right? So that would be self-censorship. So within that whole broad range, I wanted to ask you to tell us about one or two of your favorite unrealized projects. So maybe we can begin with Jane.
I'm always the big sister who has to start. I guess, well, my uber unrealized project at the moment would be to have the coming U.S. election come out in favor of women. And other than that, I would like to do a demolition derby project.
And you mentioned also the labyrinth.
Yes.
Because I think that's interesting in relation to the theme. Can you talk about it? Because it would be great to hear you talk about the labyrinth, what it originally was, and then I kind of imagine it to go into the city.
Well, we were showing a picture of it. I did a labyrinth made out of cardboard boxes that we collected. They were from like refrigerator boxes that were in vacant lots. And now I look back and think, how did we get all these boxes that weren't covered in pee, but they were fairly clean cardboard boxes. And I made a labyrinth inside this art space that kids in the neighborhood could run around and go crazy in and tag up the walls. And I had Crash and Knock help me start it off. And it did make them very excited, these kids. Then they asked their principal to have me make another one in their school, and then we did another one with Crash at his space in the Bronx a couple of years ago. So I would like to do it again on a larger scale with that many people could contribute their various tags to.
So much. Lenny, your unrealized projects?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mentioned this one opportunity, but that was just like a financial unrealized, it was like I thought I was going to get this job, and I didn't wind up getting it. Oh, boo-hoo. But really, I think it's funny because I think my unrealized project will happen after my death. Okay, so not anything like morbid, but the seeing the fair and seeing how Jean-Michel, Keith Haring, Mr. Warhol, Andy, 30 years later, they still dominate these fairs. Every year, every fair, whichever one I've been to, multiple gallerists with these individuals' work. I see walking through museum gift shops, calendars, tchotchkes, stuff, merch. And I think, wow, is that the legacy of a dead artist? right? I mean, what happens to you when you left the planet? So my unrealized project is probably in my lifetime, I won't get into any of these like legit mega institutions, but not cocky like the day in the Kandinsky cocky, but that was a long time ago. But today my mindset is like, yeah, one day that will happen, but I won't live to see it. But that's not a bad thing. My legacy will be solid, and I have 2 incredible children. My son, Timothy, just celebrated his 40th, and my daughter, Tabitha, she's 34. So those guys are my best work, if you will. And so the legacy, yeah, really, shout out to my children. But maybe that's why it took me so long to kind of arrive, or to, wow, you finally made it, Lenny. And it's like, yeah, but I wasn't on a schedule, right? I was taking care of shit that was way more meaningful than just my name in lights or whatever you may say. So my project will be realized, Hans. It's just, I'm ahead of my time, as always.
Thank you so much. And James, tell us about your unrealized projects.
Yeah, my friend Nathan is in the room. I host a poetry night in London called Adult Entertainment, and it's only because we were all like messing around and we said we got to grow up and become adults. And I was like, yeah, how about we do poetry, but you know, we do it like adults do it. But she said that her friend thought it was a sex party, and I was like, no, it's just a poetry reading. So my unrealized ambition is to actually host a sex party and and turn it into poetry reading afterwards. The other thing I really want to do is get out in the streets, and I mean, I'm scared of going to jail, you know, so I don't want to get caught graphing, but I'd love to have my poetry written on a big wall somewhere, so I just need some tips on that.
Some chalk, use some chalk. I mean, if you use chalk, what can they really do to you, right? Have a little spray water bottle alongside, so if they come and confront you, you just say, oh my God, what was I thinking? And just...
Moment of madness.
I mean, there could not be a better conclusion. And listening, James, to your point made me think of, you know, Tsung Tsai, the Hong Kong poet, called also the King of Kowloon, who actually painted thousands of poems into the urban tissue of Hong Kong. I'm very grateful to Art Basel, the Petit Palais, to all of you for being here today. And please join me in a big round of applause. A big round of applause for Jane Dickson, FUTURA 2000, James Massiah, a big round of applause.